I have always been drawn to lush fantasy worlds in stories, far before I became an artist, creating them for a living in the games industry. Growing up, I was the adventurous type that every afternoon I'd set off into the woods just outside my childhood home, where trees were monsters, sticks were my swords, creeks were rivers and oceans. Eventually, as I did get a bit older, I got more into role playing games like Final Fantasy. But no matter what I was doing, I do remember the feeling of wonder and how my imagination would go wild, seeing all of these beautiful locations, meeting these characters, and fighting colossal monsters. I just never thought it could be an actual job. However, as I did learn, it's not an easy one. Today, we're going to look at several fantasy-themed splash art illustrations. These are a form of visual communication that conveys ideas, emotions, and stories. Known for their rich visual style, their high level of polish, several key elements really must come together to create a compelling and effective illustration. These are composition, lighting, perspective, and scale, storytelling, and a balance of contrast. For us artists, it can be both exciting and challenging trying to develop them. Growing up though, I just never understood the time, the dedication, and the raw skill it required to craft such uniquely dense and original fantasy worlds. And so today I hope to break all of these key components down and explain through your very own submissions on how to approach these both in theory and in technique. Alright, so first up is going to be storytelling. Storytelling is an integral part of every illustration. Every illustration tells a story. This largely comes down to the posing of characters, the placement of these characters, their interactions with each other, and the expressions that they convey. These are all very powerful tools. So we have this awesome submission, and these are all submissions based on a Final Fantasy 16 theme, which is an awesome game. I just played it. And this one is by Night Griffin. I think this is an awesome picture. It has very dynamic lighting. We have the two main characters, Clive and Jill here, but I feel like the weakest aspect of them is their posing and their interactions. She's kind of gently putting his hand on them, but they both kind of have like a zombie-like stare, and he's kind of like ignoring her in a very kind of cold way. So I do feel like if I were going to personally depict their relationship, which is a huge part of this picture, I'd try to do that a little more, I guess, aggressively. Like really get in there and show them looking and connecting with each other, right? That's going to create a stronger emotional resonance, not only with themselves, but us, the viewer. We'll connect more, seeing how happy or whatever kind of emotion we want to go through, make these characters, but they have to kind of make that contact a little more directly, I feel, to pull that off. So the other part we need to get right, I feel, with storytelling is the amount of detail, or we don't want to neglect a lot of it. So I do feel in the original, the characters do feel, particularly Jill here, feels a little underdone compared to even Clyde and the Phoenix itself. I feel like they all kind of have to be a little bit more on an even level playing field when it comes to their overall detail, and they can't be an afterthought or left undone in any kind of way. So neglecting small things can make an image feel very incomplete and detract from the overall narrative as well. So think of always what your visual hierarchy is and make sure those are detailed accordingly. But again, great submission. Thank you. Take these recommendations with a grain of salt. And a lot of these are done by my brush sauce artist, Anastasia. So thank you, Anna, for helping us with these awesome recommendations here. All right. So next up, we have lighting. I feel lighting is so important when it comes to not only delivering illustration, but particularly like splash art. It adds to the mood, right? The sense of drama. And of course, it really connects well with story to deliver the proper narrative. And it can make or break a picture in regards to its readability. And here we have Tysagets. Again, sorry if I pronounce you or anyone else's name wrong in this video, but this is an awesome picture. The composition's really solid. The details are all there, but I do feel the lighting is the aspect of it that is bringing it down the most. The values in this are simply too scattered. So that's the first tip when it comes to lighting, is make sure your values are organized in the way that you need to. See, if we desaturate this, you can kind of see there's a lot of hot spots everywhere. Our eye is always drawn to these really bright sort of hot spots in a picture. So we have to be really careful with how we place those when it comes to directing the viewer's attention. My recommendations for this is simply to simplify that quite a bit. Make this the lightest and brightest spot, and make sure that by adjusting these values, we can have a much easier to digest silhouette, which will make a more impactful illustration, right? So when it comes to the actual color of this, we do have to factor in the quality of light. That is, whether it's soft and diffused and hard and direct type of lighting. Soft light is great. It's great for subtle transitions and basically kind of adding a bit of a gradient in between some smaller areas, kind of like in the background. The background's diffused, but I want to do a harder direct light on the character from that magical sphere light source, because it's going to push the shapes with higher contrast. So definitely consider the quality of light when it comes to building your illustration. A good example of this month was Nanarai's image, right? Again, this is awesome. We could see all the shapes. It's got the soft, partially warm rim light coming from behind, and of course we get that nice cool blue magical effect that we're having. Everything is the same as the previous illustration, but I feel this one becomes like just a bit more readable, and that again adds to the overall clarity of the picture, and it's through that lighting. Next up, for our third big point here, let's talk about contrast and overall balance. I love this submission here from Zuzia, for example. It has very high contrast in it, and what I would try to do is balance that out. And so when I say balance, I really mean just factor in the hard shapes, the soft shapes, the light shapes, the dark shapes, the fast lines, the slow lines, and how these pieces are all kind of interconnected and fitting together. So they're pretty much compositional tools. This is, again, like I said, really fantastic, but there's a equal emphasis on many aspects of this particular picture, so it kind of takes away from the clarity of the composition. If we do make this quite a bit smaller, we lose that secondary character in there altogether, which I do feel is a problem. So I feel like no matter what kind of adjustments we need to make on this, I definitely recommend pushing the character, de-emphasizing and correcting the lighting on all of these spheres. There's a lot of awesome detail in the background, but the background's not as important here. So can we imply that detail rather than directly showing it all, right? Sometimes less can be more, and simplicity when it comes to contrast and balance is actually a really great shortcut to figuring that out. So for my recommendation, I'm trying to do just that, right? Really create and enhance the mood, through this magical kind of lighting with the creature, draw more contrast with the character, like I said, and de-emphasizing a lot of those foreground elements. To me, adding that blue light from the creature, actually affecting all these little cubes and bits of geometry in the level, would certainly enhance and make it a lot more believable. So there is a consistency to all of this as too. Like whatever you choose for lighting or for balancing out an image, try to be as consistent as you can with that, as consistency will ultimately create a nice sense of balance. So if you want to go rougher, for example, in the background, tighten up that detail on the character in the foreground. That's going to help it out entirely. Spitfire here had a great example, very similar composition and structure, and I do feel it's balanced, and the level of contrast in this is executed pretty well, right? We have cool versus warm, negative space, we have the positive space with the fire in the background. There's a simple sense of movement like this, and we can see some sketch lines in there. Like we could still see some of the original drawing in there, which, since it's in every aspect of the picture, creates a very even level of finish. It's nice and consistent in that regard. So thank you, Spitfire, for sharing this awesome illustration with us of Odin. So next up, for number 4 here, even though we've been talking about it fairly passively up to this point. But composition, I feel composition does need to be its own bullet point, as it's largely important to delivering an effective and successful illustration, right? And by composition, I'm really just literally talking about the arrangement, right, of all the pieces and the elements, within a piece, whether it's this is the shape, this is the shape, this is a shape up here, and how those are creating that sense of movement within the piece. Movement is a huge part of composition. We have to make sure we keep that in mind when it comes to the design of a picture. So, right, we want to guide the viewer's eye. And I assume this is what the viewer is intended to do with this awesome submission here by Mekong, right? So we want to show that the harpy character here is kind of like falling, right? But we leave very little room in this space to do that. We don't get that kind of vertical sort of motion in there, and I feel like if we balance that out with the cool and the warm light actually hitting the character, it's going to work a lot more effectively. So a few simple tweaks on this, some sparks and embers to show movement, the character coming down at a diagonal. Diagonals are always more dynamic than something more horizontal or even vertical. So if you need to create a dynamic picture, figure out a way to triangulate everything, right? Triangle, triangle, right? This is all triangles, and it's a simple shortcut, a hack to make a dynamic picture. So again, not only you're factoring in the space and balancing out the triangles, but definitely consider what are the positive and negative shapes. See, like you only had one little negative shape here and in here, which is okay, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like balancing that a little bit more, giving a little bit more room to breathe on all sides of the picture will just enhance all of that. And again, push that blue light on the character from that effect, and you're gonna have a really successful piece here. Just a few other notes on composition in regards to the picture I designed, at the start of the video. I always just try to ask myself, where do I need the viewer to look, whether it's one focal point or two, and how do I design and factor in everything else to work with that? So I want to create a sense of energy within a piece, no matter what I do, that creates movement and direction. Again, these are more fast and direct lines. Other ones can be a little bit more subtle, kind of coming up and then over through there like that. And of course, just overlapping and maximizing overlaps when necessary, stacking elements, all right? The foreground is stacking with the character, it's overlapping the background, which is overlapping the horizon. It's all overlapped. And doing that while avoiding in tangents is key, right? Tangents is when you just create an awkward amount of space between two objects. So it's something to certainly keep in mind. And before we get to the last one, I just wanted to give you guys a reminder. We have 2 spots open for this month's group mentorship over at the Patreon. Links below for all that, but it's a fantastic group and everyone is growing tremendously well in there. So definitely check it out. All right, for our last big tip of the video, that's going to be scale and perspective. Scale and perspective when it comes to illustration is so important. Not only can we create a convincing sense of scale and depth and place with the pictures, but it can also tell, its own story. So it's a very powerful tool that illustrators have at our disposal. So the first big thing I want to get into with this is drama and impact. This is a lovely scene. I love this creature. I think it's more, kind of like fan art for fantasy, but that's great. I love this. It really feels large, but I do feel there is a loss of drama and impact with this because we are so far removed from the scene. Usually the closer you are up to at least one aspect of the picture, that can help the immersion for the viewer. We're just really far away, essentially. And the other aspect of scale that's really important here is emphasis and hierarchy. So I do feel this is done very well, in that side of the picture, is that this is clearly about, due to the scale of this versus this, right? This is the most important aspect of it. So that's always important to recognize when it comes to designing a picture. But I do feel there's aspects of this that are underplayed that do impact the depth and sense in this scene. So without entirely redrawing the thing, which is what I would recommend to really create a dynamic sense of scale in this picture, let's just work with what's here. I do recommend making that tail feel more dynamic, flowing from the background all the way up to the foreground, and of course leading the viewer's eye, to the 2 main important contributing aspects of this design. It's still like a small versus a large object. That's still the story here. It's never going to change. But it's just something to consider. I do feel balancing out the negative space with a simple pattern and rhythm is going to help that contrast and emphasize this character even more because he's surrounded by the only warm color in the picture. It's something to consider anyway. And of course, upping the spell effects on the magic, I feel, will help overall, bringing that lighting into all aspects of the picture. So yeah, when it comes to the narrative, definitely make sure it's intentful either way, whether or not a character is big or small, how close or far we are from them, and what that could infer, right? Are the characters desolate? Are they desperate? Are they isolated? Or should, they just in a tough battle, so the camera should be a little closer, right? Everything communicates something in a subtle way, and it's always just important to think about that. A great example of this month was from Elvira, one of my patrons. Thank you for your submission, Elvira. This is an amazing piece. See where you got Clive and Ifrit? We're right up under that character. We're behind them. It's really selling how big and impactful this creature is. I'm more invested as a viewer into this image because of the camera angle and shot design of it, which is all emphasizing not only the depth, but of course the scale. So definitely factor those guys in. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys think of these pieces. I think these are awesome overall. And if you have any other kind of questions or topic suggestions, let me know below. I do not know when the next challenge is going to be, but you can join the free public Discord. I do hang in there every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern if you want to stop by and say hi, but I'll catch you guys later.